going. That is the... Everybody in the world touched the pad and it should be used. So I've got the, let's take a little... Morning crew and welcome to my Andy Mechanic YouTube channel. Now this is episode 3 in the MR2 saga of why when the engine's cold it runs for a short period of time. It does start and it runs for maybe 2 or 3 minutes sometimes and then stalls out, and if you try and start it, it just sort of fires for 2 or 3, maybe 4 revolutions of the crank, maybe 6, you know, it does vary a little bit, but then just doesn't run. If you keep cranking for a while, we did find in the last video, it does sort of fire again and then it dies. And in episodes 1 and 2, there's been lots and lots of tests done on the vehicle. We've sort of gone through all the wiring and the ignition relay and all that kind of stuff. And in the last video, we sort of finished off with finding out that the injector pulse is stopping. Basically, we're getting about 3 pulses when we initially start to crank the engine, and then it flatlines. No more injector pulse. Now, I have a sneaky suspicion that's a decision by the ECU to stop fueling the engine because it's not seeing that IGF or IGT signal, whichever one it is, from the igniter. I don't think it's a fuel pressure issue. We've proved that, I think, in the first video. We've plumbed up the fuel pressure gauge and fuel pressure was maintained throughout. Although it didn't prime the pump when you turned the ignition to the on position. It only seemed to prime the pump when you actually cranked. That's sort of in the back of our mind at the moment. That's niggling me away because all the other Japanese cars that I worked on, when you turn the key to on, it primes the pump for 2 or 3 seconds just to make sure that the fuel pressure is up to the spec, you know, 42 psi or whatever the book says it should be. Now, this video has spurred many comments, and these comments have been really useful. Some have been comments which, you know, things that I haven't really thought about. And the immobilizer is one. I hate immobilizers. You know, for me, all they do is stop something doing what it should do. An engine should run and be reliable. You put another component in there, and all it will do is make the vehicle more unreliable. And in this case, if it is the immobilizer, it's done exactly that. If the immobilizer is faulty, I'll be ripping it out and burning it. I promise you that. We've also done loads of bench testing on the ignition system. We pulled out the distributor, we checked the 3 pickup coils, everything seemed fine. What did come to light is the fact that there's a discrepancy between the service manual that I'm using and this particular car. So I'm going to take you outside now and just show you exactly the model of this MR2. So this one is a G Limited. It's a manual transmission, obviously, and on the sticker there, look, it's a 3S GE. Now, unfortunately, the manual that I was using was for the 3S GTE model, not the GE. So there were some differences, and this was highlighted immediately as soon as we started looking at the ECU, because the pin configuration of the ECU is completely different to the service manual. So I went online and I tried to find another service manual, one that was going to be, you know, match the pin layout of the ECU, just to make sure we've got the correct data that we need, because this is one of the biggest problems for mechanics these days, is actually sourcing the correct information for exactly the model that they're working on. And you know, I don't have any friends down at Toyota where I can say, hey, look, this is the VIN number, this is the chassis number, send me the PDF workshop manual. I have to do for Toyotas what you guys have to do, which is basically trawl through the internet trying to scavenge what information I can grab hold of. Either that, or you can pay a subscription every year to, you know, to Autodata or whoever else produces these service manuals online. But as you well know, I'm a bit of a cheapskate and I don't want to spend loads of money. Plus, you can be really careful when you're downloading manuals online these days. There's a lot of viruses out there as well. And the last thing I want is to corrupt my PC. Okay, well, I did find another service manual online, and I'm going to do a quick screen capture to show you what I found. Here we go. So the first workshop manual, the one that I've been using the videos to date, is this one here, and it says a 1991 MR2 that it's applicable for. Here, look, you see SW20, which is what ours is, 21 series, 1991. Now, the MR2 I've got outside is a 1992. So there's the first discrepancy, unfortunately. But if we go to the second, so go to the pin layout on this manual, which is page 351, then you can see that's what we've been working with, and this is completely incorrect with this vehicle. However, the plug dimensions and the number of pins per plug is correct. Now, the second manual that I found is this one here, which is titled, it has actually got a front page, this one, which is the 3SGE, which is exactly what we've got. But it's a 1993, so it's a year after our vehicle was produced. So I'm sort of jumping between the two, aren't I? So the pin layout on this one is very, very different. And if we just scan down, here we've got 4 connector plugs. And again, it says SW20, which is what we've got, but obviously this is the year after ours. And again, it's all different. So at this point in time, I just completely gave up trying to find the right manual online. What I'm going to do is remove the ECU from the vehicle, and it hasn't been started this morning, so I'll pull the ECU out, and I'm actually going to make my own diagram to exactly where all the pins are using the references that Tota use for each of the wires. And I'll show you on the screen, and then we'll move on with this diagnostics. Right, yet again, I have the ECU out of the vehicle. I just want to clarify the part number on the ECU, which is here, look, just so we all know exactly which one we're dealing with. And we've got a 26 pin, a 16 pin, and a 22 pin connector. Right, let's pull it apart, have a look. Geez, it's almost like deja vu. I should really have done this the first time around, really, shouldn't I? As soon as we spotted a discrepancy, but hey, such is life. Makes it more fun anyway. Right, let's get rid of that. Okay, let's take a closer look. Okay, so we're looking at the largest plug, the 26 pin plug, and we've got E01 on this pin here. E01, and the one behind it is E02. So we can see that okay. Right, let's run down the top layer first. So we've got injector number 1, followed by, my eyesight's terrible, injector number 2. We've got, looks like, R50 is the next one, whatever that is. And then we've got RSCHT, and then plus B. Cool. Well, that was quite an arduous task, especially with my eyesight, but I've got what I need, I think, and that's my scribbles on there. Look, so that's the plug 3. Geez, where's plug 2? Plug 2, and scribbly scribble plug 1. Okay, I'm going to also head out to the car and get the colours of the wires that correlate with each of these pins, chuck the whole lot onto an Excel spreadsheet, and create a very nice picture for you. And once that's done, we'll come back and I'll rig up the scope before we start the engine, and we're going to look at IGT and IGF and see if either of those two drop out and then the engine stalls. I can only do 2 channels. I've only got a 2-channel scope. If I had a 3-channel, I'd like to do the ignition pulse and the injector pulse all at the same time, but I can't. But it's those 2 igniter wires that I'm really focusing on at the moment. Okay, time for a cup of tea. Back soon. Right, I'm back. After extensive research and playing with Excel, I'll show you what I've come up with. Here we go. So, we've got the 3 plugs, and all the blanked out bits. I've blanked them out if there's no wires, or if that pin was blank on the inside of the ECU, i.e. not used. So I've just blanked all those off, because if there's no wire or no label on the side of the ECU, then really it's doing nothing. And we need to focus on the IGF and IGT, which are the 2 wires that go to the igniter. So IGF is here and IGT is down here. So we'll get the PicoScope set up. Engine's still not been running today, so we'll put obviously the positive of the 2 probes, one on each of these 2, and down to ground, and we'll see if either of those 2 signals cease to be at the same time the engine stalls. And that's going to give us more of a pointer to what's going on. And I'll do this at the ECU end. And then we can do the same thing again at the igniter and see what's happening. Because if there's a break in the wiring, we may see a difference between what we get. Now, before I go outside and actually start the engine, I want to run through a few of the viewers' comments, which I think are really, really quite poignant when it comes to this kind of fault. Andrew Thompson says here, look, check the IGF signal from the igniter output. So it's an igniter output to the ECU. The IGT is an input from the ECU for timing purposes. Yeah, I agree. I think that's where the fault code lies. It was fault code 14, and that was telling us that the ECU wasn't seeing that signal. So we really should head down that road. Which is a bit against what Toyota was saying. They were saying check all the wiring up to it first, but we've done all that. Jason Puttock, he was saying when I was doing the very quick ignition pulse test with the strobe, just to see if we were getting a spark and to see if the spark continued even after the engine had died, i.e. while we were cranking. He noticed the fact that the spark, the pulse on the strobe was erratic. It wasn't in time with the engine, and personally I think that's more to do with the filming of the strobe. There's only 24 frames a second, and of course the strobe flashes very quickly, and it may well be that one of the flashes missed a frame. So I don't think that's the problem, but again we can look at that a bit later on if need be with the scope. He also mentioned, did Jason, that the fuel pressure could be the issue. Maybe the fuel filter's blocked, but we've got the fuel pressure gauge on there and the gauge is indicating full pressure, so I'm not too concerned about the fuel filter. I don't think that's the problem. Now, Arthur mentioned that it could well be the immobilizer or the alarm system on the vehicle stopping the signal to the ECU. If that immobilizer is cutting in, I don't know which wires the immobilizer breaks circuit on that vehicle, but potentially that could be the problem, or it could just be it could be a dry solder joint in the immobilizer, it could be a dry solder joint in the igniter, or it could also be a dry solder joint in the ECU itself. Potentially it could be any one of those 3 things, because don't forget when everything's cold first start in the morning, it does run for a few minutes and then it stalls out, and then it doesn't run from then on, but it tries to start. And that to me could well be a solder joint. Now remember, this vehicle was used on gravel roads for a couple of years, and those gravel roads, the vibrations that go through the car were quite horrific, and that could very much cause this problem on a circuit board. Richard Prosser, he mentioned that check the ground wires on the ignition relay, as he thinks that the 13 ohms is a bit too high, so maybe I'll be checking that again if we can't find anything else. System Rat 2008, fuel pump not getting power once the engine started. Well, I think it is. It just doesn't prime when you first turn the ignition on, because again we've not seen a drop in fuel pressure, but hey, you could be right. Alex N, yes, we've covered this bit a bit earlier on. There is a variation in the workshop manual, and yeah, I reckon I've covered that now. We've sort of addressed that issue and we know where all the pins are. Okay, what else have we got? We've got 1 or 2 more. Really good points though, so I think it's important to bring them up. Happy 543210. A dirty idle air control motor. Well, it doesn't have a motor as part of the idle speed control valve. It's 2 windings, but you're right. It could, potentially it could cause a stall if the little spindle that's operated inside that idle speed control valve is, gummed up and so on. So one quick test for that could be to hold the throttle open whilst cranking to give the engine a bit more air and to see if it keeps running. Maybe. But we've already seen that the injector pulse ceases, and I think it's the lack of fuel that's stalling this engine. Okay, good point there. Josh C. What does the immobilizer cut? So we're back onto the immobilizer again. And he also wants me to check the powers and grounds to the ECU. Well, we did that in the first video. But hey, I might be doing that again now that we know exactly where all the right pins are, because we could have been checking the wrong pins. Another one we could go back to. Interesting stuff by me. That's not me, that's somebody's name on YouTube. Again, check the IGF and IGT pin location at the ECU. Well, we've addressed that issue now. We know we're on the right pins. Do a full pin chart. I've done that. He suspects it's the wiring between the igniter and the ECU. Yes, maybe that wiring has been interrupted and it goes via the immobilizer now. So again, that wiring could be a lot longer. It could be like, if they've not done the connections very well, where they've tapped into the loom and broken the loom, then again it could be one of those solder joints, or dare I say it, crimp connectors, who knows. Right, thanks for all your comments. I do really appreciate it, and it's good with diagnostics to brainstorm. That really is what diagnostics are all about. So without further ado, the PicoScope is all set up outside, because the car's outside again today. It's too hot to work in the workshop. So apologies for any sound quality. We're on the IGF and IGT pins on the ECU, and let's see what we get. Here we go. Right, I'm not exactly sure what kind of signals we're going to be seeing, what the voltages are going to be, so we're just going to set everything at 20 volts. Stop that. Right. And as regards division, okay, let's not go quite so fast, so let's go for 500. I think that's what we were on last time. Okay. Right, well, let's see what happens. Here we go. Cool. Okay, so we're getting a nice signal. Let's see which one drops out first, because that engine's probably going to stop in a minute. Fantastic. Okay, so what do we get? Well, that's really interesting. So we're getting basically signal pulses for every, on both the IGF and the IGT. But if you look here, look, see it drops down. So that's on the red, which is B. Let's see which wire that one is. So that is the IGF wire. And we're seeing here, look, see it's dropping down. And also the peak drops with it. Then it recovers. Then it drops again. And then that's the end of it. I think the engine's already slowing down by that point. Because you see the blue here is much wider, which is indicating slower revolution. So the engine's already stalling by that point. This is very cool. Very happy that I captured this one. Right, I'm going to save that waveform. And this is IGF. which is B. So B is red, and IGT is the blue. Start to stall waveforms. Wicked. What really concerns me here is this voltage, this drop, and it picks up, drops again. Now at this point in time we lose T, so we lose IGT completely, but we also lose the red as well. But there's another drop in voltage there. I wonder if we're going to get some injector waveforms. Let's try for that. Right, I'm going to do this test again now that we know the engine's going to stall. It might run for a little bit longer than it usually does once it's warm. Just to reiterate then, channel A, which is blue, is the IGT pin on the ECU, and I believe that's a signal from the ECU to the igniter. This one, channel B, is the IGF pin on the ECU, and that's a signal from the igniter to the ECU. Although I'm going to question that because the blue signal seems to happen first and then the red signal. But hey, that's what I've been told, but I haven't read it in the manual yet, and I'm not sure if it gives us that information. Okay, so let's start this again now. I've already saved this, so we'll start it again and we'll see what we get this time round. Ooh, this is great fun. Enjoy this kind of thing. Right. Okay. Wow. Okay, now we know that the engine fired, but it only fired once. We got one signal and that was it. Blue line's completely flatlined altogether. Very different to what we got the first time round, isn't it? It does look like it could be an igniter problem. So the red is the igniter to the ECU, and it's just not giving the pulse, is it? Okay, maybe we should try a new igniter. I have got a spare igniter that has never been put on this car yet. Let's see if that cures it. Interesting. Okay, what I'm going to do is one more test while it's plumbed up. Is I'm going to right, we'll do it once more. And I'm going to keep cranking this time. We'll see what we get. Right, here goes. Okay, going back. Oh my word, we're getting some pretty erratic stuff going on, aren't we? See, we get a pulse on the red, but nothing on the blue. And the blue is the ECU to the igniter, so maybe it's not recognizing that signal. It does look quite different, doesn't it? There's a lot of noise down the bottom here. On the first startup, that was pretty level. Got page 2. What's going on there? Oh, didn't mean to do that. There we go. And then, of course, I stop cranking, and that's it. So we are getting a pulse on channel B, which is the igniter to the ECU, but it's just maybe not recognizable. I wonder how that compares to the first one. Let's just open the first one up again. So we want that one. So how does that compare? Let's have a look. Oh man, it looks about the same, doesn't it? apart from those drop-offs. Still got a noise. Okay. Well, let's pop in another igniter, if I can find it, and we'll see what happens. Well, as luck would have it, I managed to find the old RAV4 igniter. Now, this one is a slightly different part number to the MR2. However, the pins are exactly the same because we did test this when we did the bench test of the Toto igniter. Now, we knew it wasn't conclusive, but both igniters did the same thing on the test. So we'll pull the MR2 one off, we'll plug this in, and we'll see what happens. Now, I'm not one for doing swaptronics, but it seems stupid not to do this, considering I've got one that's known good, because this car was running fine before the engine blew up. Yeah, see previous videos. So yeah, let's plug it in and see what happens, and see if we get a different kind of waveform. Right, the igniter is located just down there, and just after I did the last piece of the camera I was thinking, man, did we fit this to the car or not? Because I really can't remember. I actually looked at the file and it was a year ago that I worked on this car last, so you gotta forgive me if I can't remember everything. I do remember we had to move this this box out of the way, this fuse box, relay box thing. To get access, because it was a bit tight. Interesting stuff on the old PicoScope though, isn't it? Definitely seem to have found a problem. Right. So, how far can we move that? Mister. Oh yeah. Did we undo that? I think we did. I really think we did. Really intrigued to find out what the problem is with this car now. I won't say it started to bug me, but it's gone on for a while. Man, it's like an oven in that garage. So glad that outside thing. I think that's one. Here we go. Right. And it's got to come up. There we go, look. Fantastic. There we go. Where there's a will. No, not going to benefit us either, is it? Jesus. Okay. Leave that on. We're going to have to work around it, people. Not worth the hassle. Okay. Nothing to see, just taking things apart. Right, other one. Now we did put a cable tie in here because that plug I think had lost its clip at some point. So that cable tie was put on to hold the whole thing in place. Oh, there goes the glove. Right, that should just whittle off there. Look at the corrosion. Okay, well that one, which is the genuine part, is 89621-12050, and it's got another number on it, 131300-2010. It's a lot more corroded than I thought it was. That's what happens when you leave cars stood, isn't it? Right, RAV4 igniter, 89621-16020 or 131300-1952. But we do know the pins are the same. And the plug's the same configuration. So maybe, just maybe. There we go. I suppose we should screw it back in, because it might be grounded. Just to be a pain. Oof, look at that. When that happens. I think one screw will be enough, don't you, for this test? Okay, let's get this put back together. So pin that back on there. Suspense is killing me. Now, when I did these tests before, I didn't have a PicoScope, so maybe it's going to highlight something that we didn't see before. Because the oscilloscope that I had was pretty pants, if I'm honest. Okay, nearly there. So close. Okay, that can stay loose, it's not a problem. Let's see what we get. This should be pretty cool. Okay, so we're going to start the recorder again, and I'll go and crank and we'll see what happens. See if we get a different kind of waveform or whether we get some kind of waves back again. There we go. Damn, exactly the same again. Let's see what we got. Let's close that. Whoa. All over the place. Well, isn't that weird? We've got no output on the blue line, which is from the ECU to the igniter. And the signal that the igniter is giving is all over the place. It really does not like it. So it's pretty clear that the MR2, sorry, the RAV4 igniter pack is not one for this car. Now, also, just you can keep hearing the alarm beeping, but that's normal. It's always done that because the bonnet and the engine hood are both open, and the alarm can't set. Obviously, it sets after a period of time of not being used. Doesn't see any activity. But because the bonnet and the engine hood are open, that beep tells you that it can't set the alarm. So there's nothing wrong with the alarm with that respect. That's not an indication that there's a fault, other than the fact that the boot's open. Jeez. Okay. I think we need to put the old igniter back on again. I've been having a little ponder, and now this is essentially, I know it's for the 3S GTE, but it's got to be the same, to be honest, for the ignition system. We've got the igniter, and these are the two wires, the IGT and the IGF. And we were connected with the oscilloscope at these two pins here on the ECU. Now, we've already tested the output of the distributor, and all of those signals go into the ECU. So I don't think there's anything wrong with any of that side of the ignition system. What I'd like to test now is to put the scope on this end of the igniter, actually at the igniter itself, and eliminate this wiring, because we don't know, there's a possibility that the immobilizer has spliced into this one of these two wires, or maybe both of these two wires. So, and I want to eliminate the involvement of the immobilizer on this problem. If we're getting the same waveform at the igniter end, off the plug onto the igniter, as we did at the ECU end, then I think it's pretty fair to say we're going to call the igniter, because it's the igniter where the car gets its pickup from for the rev counter, and we know that that's not working properly. So everything's pointing towards the igniter. Right, I'll get the scope set up and plumbed into the wires at the igniter end. Now, I know the car's not going to start and run like it did on the first test, but we should still be able to get a similar cranking waveform. Now, who knows? If it is a problem with one of these two wires, we may get a continuous pulse. And if we do, then we know there's a problem in this wiring here. Right, back to the car. Okay, so we're all plumbed up, and we've got line 1, which is the blue tracer on the PicoScope, on the graph, which is the white wire, and we've got the line B on the white with a red tracer. Okay, so we're actually at the igniter right now on the plug, and let's see what happens, see what we get. Ran for a bit longer that time, didn't it? Okay, let's have a little look. Cool. Okay, so we did actually get a pretty decent waveform there. We can see how it's breaking down again, look. Okay, let's just save that. Alright, so we'll do the same test again now. I'm going to keep cranking and see if we continue to get a signal. See what we got. Wow, that's different again, look. And page 2. Nothing. Oh, hang on, I'm in the wrong place. Let's just scroll across. In fact, let's get rid of that. There we go, look. So, I was continuing to crank. It looks like we kept getting a signal. Man, this is confusing. We didn't get any output from the ECU. See, we got this real staggered signal at the start, which of course the ECU couldn't recognize. Then we started to get a reasonable output, but of course the engine wasn't running. So why? There we go, look, so that's page 2, page 1, page 2. So during cranking, that's during cranking because it's going a lot slower. Look, you can see at the start here, these are all bunched up, and that's because the engine actually fires, and basically the distributor's spinning around faster, so the frequency is quicker. But here, this is just during the crank period, and we keep getting a signal. What is going on? Alright, let's do that test again. We'll just save that one. That would lead us to believe it could well be the immobilizer cutting the signal to the ECU. Okay, you're all going, he's got it, finally! It's Well, easy producing a video at the same time as diagnosing the car. You should try it one day. Oh, can't spell igniter. Okay, with continued crank. Save. Alright, let's just try and replicate that again so we know that we're getting, that's exactly what we're getting. I'm a bit concerned about this bit at the start. I'm not sure what's going on there. Okay, here goes. Right, so we had a really good long cranking session there. Okay. Page 1. Again, exactly the same look. We get nothing's going on for a while. Okay, it's not very long. It's about a second and a bit, second and a half. Yeah, almost 2 seconds actually. Where trace B, which is the yellow, which goes on to the white with a red tracer, which is Igniter to ECU. So the Igniter is giving out a real random kind of signal here, and then once it starts to, settle down and give a decent signal, then the ECU recognizes it, and then on the blue trace, which is channel A, the IGT signal then comes alive, and we start to see a signal going from the ECU back to the Igniter. This is really cool, but what does it all mean? Well, that's when the engine was trying to start, the RPM was a bit quicker, and this is now me just cranking away, but we are seeing a signal. We're seeing a trace. So if we ran wires directly to the ECU from the Igniter, maybe, just maybe, this car's going to run. It's worth a try, isn't it? Let's give it a go. Okay, absolute sacrilege, I know, but I've just basically cut the 2 wires about 50mm before the ECU plug, just for proof of concept, and running these, because I have to cut those because the immobilizer may be putting one or both of them to ground, so that it may invalidate this test. Basically, those 2 wires go on to the 2 IGF and IGT respectively on the Igniter. The other 3 wires from the Igniter, because I had a spare plug, don't forget, are running down to the Igniter. It's the Igniter plug on the loom. So all we've done with this, although I've relocated the Igniter pack, is we've bypassed the white with the red tracer wire and the white wire in the loom that relate to IGF and IGT. Well, there's only one thing to do now, and that's try and start the engine and see if it runs. Here we go. Okay, I've got the scope set up as well, so we can watch the signal and see if it continues, if the engine continues to run. Now, there's still a concern about the injectors cutting out as well. Remember, we only got 3 pulses, but that might have been to do with the ECU not seeing this pulse from the Igniter. On the, I always get confused, ECU to Igniter, that would be, no, Igniter to ECU, that would be channel B, which will be the red signal. This is the incoming signal, and this is the outgoing signal. Incoming to the ECU, outgoing from the ECU. Okay, too much rambling, let's give it a go. Huh. What happened there? Alright, so we did get some fires, and then we lost it again, didn't we? Maybe that's a bad connection. So the signal coming out of the Igniter became unrecognizable. It lost that signal pulse, and therefore the ECU stopped pulsing as well. Shit. We saw that pulse continue, so maybe if I continue to crank, let's see what we get that time round. Alright, so let's do the same thing again now, but I'll keep cranking. Okay, things are looking good. Right, so a bit of a delay, and then we got a pulse. And that pulse continued until I stopped cranking. So why is it not starting? So we could go back to the original problem of no fuel. So we know now, because I've only got 2 channels on the scope, we know we're always going to get a pulse on the ECU to igniter whenever it sees a recognizable pulse signal from the igniter to the ECU. So I think we could remove channel A off the IGT wire, which is the white wire, and we'll put it onto the injector pulse, and we'll see if we're getting an injector pulse or not during this same cranking period. I bet we're not. Then we're going to work out why we're not. Okay, so channel A, which is the blue line, is now the injector pulse, and channel B is still the IGF, which is the igniter signal to the ECU. And I'm going to do a test where I'm going to continue to crank. Now, before, we've only ever seen 3 pulses of the injector. I don't know, maybe we're going to see more. Maybe we're not going to see any. At least it's going to tell us why it's not starting. Right. Oh, it's looking good. I can smell fuel actually. So, it started right on the page. So blue is injectors. What did we get from an injector pattern? Well, there you go. So we only got 4 actuations of the injector. There's the fuel I can smell. 5 actuations of the injector, and then nothing. Nothing at all. Cheers, alarm. That's why it's not running. So why is the injector not working? Let's just check to make sure we're getting an ignition feed to the injectors. Right, I've got channel A just onto the 12 volt feed to the injectors, the main power feed. And B is still on the signal from the igniter to the ECU, which is giving us these little pulses here, look. Right, let's see what we get. Okay. Ugh. There we go. Okay, so this is ignition on. This is cranking. So A is the voltage being provided to the injectors, the positive voltage, because don't forget the ECU grounds the injectors when they should be opening. And that's during cranking, so a pretty big volt drop on initial crank, and then it's coming up to about quite acceptable actually up there. So those injectors do appear to be getting continuous voltage. Cheers, alarm. Yeah, that's just the fluctuations from the starter motor volt drop. Huh. I was hoping that that might have just disappeared. Damn. So what's causing those injectors? Why is the ECU deciding not to continue to fuel? That's the problem. Right, I may have made an error. There's a circuit on these cars that provides ignition voltage to lots of different components, and I've tested this. I tested that one at the Igniter feed. So now I've rigged it up to test it at one of the actual injectors to see if, who knows, who you know, the immobilizer might break the feed to the injectors. So let's give it a go. If it's no different, then we know they haven't done. Okay, page 1. Nah, it's the same, isn't it? Still getting the 12 volts. So it's the ECU that's stopping the pulse, as opposed to the feed to the injectors being cut by the immobilizer. Shit. Geez, I'm back. It's been another long day. Lots of other interruptions coming in. So, I keep saying so, and I've got to stop doing it. Where are we now? Well, we've bypassed the wiring in the loom and taken the igniter IGT and IGF directly to the ECU, and we've seen on the scope just now that the ECU is seeing the signal from the igniter, and it's triggering the ECU to give an output signal back to the igniter. All that's working just fine now that we've bypassed the loom. Why should we have to do that? There must be a problem to do with the loom. Maybe it's the immobilizer. I'm not too sure just yet. I want to go back to basics. Now, Josh C mentioned, hey, check the powers and grounds of the ECU. Now, we did do that as per the Toyota tests, but I've got my test light, and we're going to head back outside and just do a very quick check. Now, it may be that after we've started the crank, a power or a ground, most likely a power, disappears, and that could be the reason why the ECU is stopping triggering the injector. So I want to check all of them. You guys can watch the bulb whilst I'm cranking and let me know if the bulb goes out when it should stay on. Right, easy one. These two on the left here, these two brown ones, are both power grounds, as Toyota call them. So they're both grounds. So we'll just back probe into there. There we go, look. Now our test light's already plumbed onto battery positive. So we'll get our ground wire. There we go, look. And we should get... Right, so we'll stick that on there. I think you can just about see that. There you go. We'll give it a crank. Excellent. Okay, so that one was a pass. Let's stick it onto the next one. So we'll go for the other earth. I think we're all the way in. There we go, look. Right, give it another crank. Well, that was a pass too. Now I'm sure there's another earth we need to check. So we'll look at the diagram. Yes, E1, which is this brown wire here. So we'll check that one next. Can't miss the back probe, you can get in there. There we go. So it should light again, hopefully. Right, another crank coming up. Fantastic, that was a pass, super. That's all the grounds on the ECU. Okay, so we can now look at the power side. Let's find it the first feed in. Where's my back probe? There we go, pop that out. Okay, well, battery should be that red and white, so white with a red tracer down here, so we'll pop that in there. I'm guessing that should be permanent live, but we'll find out. There we are. Right. So we'll just swap the probe, the test light, onto the ground side. Right. Test light onto ground, onto a bolt that's actually loose. Oh, that's right. It's the ECU bolt. That's okay. Stick it on there, And we can then go on to this one and we should get battery positive. Hopefully. Maybe when the ignition's on. Let's find out. Yeah, that's not so good. What's going on there? Huh. That's not a ground, Mr. Young. Jesus. Okay, right. Let's give the engine a crank, see what happens. Right, well that was a pass, wasn't it? So we'll get rid of that. And now these two black with yellow traces are both live from the EFI relay, so that'd be an interesting one to check. Okay, so put that on there. Now it probably only comes on when I turn the ignition on. It does! Right, time to crank. Okay, well that was a pass too. One more wire left, which is that one here, look, right next to it. Dum dum dum, come on Mr. Probe, there we go. Right, back on there. A bit tighter. Crocodile clip's dying. Right, ignition on. Cool. Well, that was a pass too. Jeez, I'm running out of options here. Right, well that's all the powers and all the grounds to the ECU checked, and they're all a pass, even during cranking. So why is that ECU stopping the fuel, you know, the duty cycle, the trigger to the injectors? Why is it only giving us 3 pulses to the injectors and then stopping? Because every time we try and crank that engine, it does fire and then immediately doesn't fire, and then just doesn't fire at all while you're cranking it. So it's blatantly obvious it wants to run if it had some fuel. I tell you what, I bet if we sprayed something down the intake manifold, some brake cleaner, it would run. That would be proof of concept, wouldn't it? All it's missing is fuel. Back to basics again. Why have this complicated stuff? Should we do that? Could be interesting, couldn't it? Let's give that a go. Right, we'll stick some brake cleaner down the intake manifold. Let's see if it runs for a bit longer. It did. Right, I better replicate that again then. Okay, one more. Oh yeah. Well, back to basics. So the engine continued to run with the brake cleaner as fuel, which tells me everything we suspected. The ECU is getting the signal from the igniter, it's reacting, now we've bypassed the loom, and the igniter is getting the signal from the ECU on those two IGF IGT wires. We're continuing to get spark because it runs as we thought. Oh, stupid alarm. All the grounds, all the power feeds to the ECU are all good. The only problem, the only reason why this car isn't running is because the injectors are not being triggered any more than 2 or 3 times when you try and start the engine. So what's causing the injectors to stop firing? I don't know yet. We've checked the power feed to the injectors, the 12 volt feed, ignition live. That's good. That's still there. We saw that on the scope. I need to think about this. I need to work out what would cause the ECU to stop fueling completely but still allow a spark to occur. Odd, isn't it? Well, we've got another week to think about it, because that's it for today. I've been outside for about 6 hours doing this filming, and it's been pretty on and off. So what do you think? Help me out, because I'm running out of ideas. Sure, it could be a problem inside the ECU. Somebody did mention, I forget, I actually didn't make a note of the comment, but somebody was saying that the transistors inside the ECU can fail. They're the ones that trigger the injectors. You know, put the injector to ground to energize the injector. They can fail. They are known to fail on these models of Toyota. It could be that. We know it's not the Igniter. Sure, I bench tested it a year ago and it was a pass, but that was an ambiguous test. It wasn't a Toyota test, it was one that I found on the net. But the car still runs. So we've bypassed the fault. If we give it an alternative fuel source other than through the injectors, it will run. If I stood there long enough spraying the brake cleaner in, it would continue to run. It would probably backfire at some point and explode and catch fire, but it would still run. So it's the injectors. That's where we're at. What's stopping those injectors from firing? And it's all 4 injectors that aren't firing, not just 1 or 2. So it's definitely an ECU decision. Okay crew, that's it. That's it for today. If you enjoyed the video, why not subscribe to the channel? Click on subscribe, you'll see a little gear icon turn up. Click on the gear icon and then you can tick the box and turn on notifications. You'll also find me on Facebook, Google+, Instagram and Twitter. Feel free to communicate through any of those portals, but first point of contact, if you don't mind, through the comments section of YouTube. Alright chaps, cheers, over and out.